Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part there for the 11th of February 2025. We're going to start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, you can find them in the description to the video below. We have some pretty significant numbers here. 1,390 personnel lost is sort of in the middle of where we've seen it recently, but it's still a significant number. And we have 13 tanks above the daily average, 31 troop-carrying AFVs well above the daily average, 44 artillery systems, twice the daily average, 2 MLRS, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. We have 169 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's a phenomenal number. And 1 piece of special equipment. I was looking at some stats from a different source counting up the equipment, and I wonder whether that includes vehicles and fuel tanks as well, because the trend line was just up and up and up, and this is the Russians are just losing an awful lot of kit. We go to Dell's stats. Dell's done some great little tinkering with a bit of feedback from someone who said actually it's really difficult to see the trend line, so we'll have a look at that in a second. Let's look at some of these records. So drones, the 7-day rolling average and the 30-day rolling average for drones is there are records there. We also have a 30-day rolling average record for vehicles and fuel tanks. So of course, when you add 169 to that number today, then you can see why that is the case. Now, when we go and look at, say, tanks, interesting here that now we have a nice purple trend line there, which gives us a real sense that actually tank losses are going back up again, which is quite surprising, because some of these other categories, APVs, you've had APVs falling in terms of the trend. You have artillery going quite significantly down, but I think that reflects this period here. I think that will then start to go up to take into account these days where artillery pieces have been increasing as of late. And then we have, what's the other one we want to see? Look at vehicles and fuel tanks. Just a really significant number of these vehicles being taken out on a daily basis. So the Ukrainians doing a really good job of treating Russian equipment there. So that's a pretty good day for the Ukrainians. Now we've got some commentary on equipment losses, as you'd expect. Russian mill blogger and former Storm Z. Oh no, first of all, we're going to talk about North Koreans, then we're going to go on to equipment. So North Koreans first. Right. A Russian mill blogger and former Storm Z fighter Daniil Tulenkov claims that the role of North Korean troops in the war with Ukraine is zero, and that the North Korean army was ineffective. So this is coming from a Russian mill blogger, and this is a point I vehemently disagree with. But Null Reports also disagrees, and I think for the right reasons. In my opinion, it shows that many Russian reporters have no idea what is happening on the battlefield. North Koreans are indeed disorganized, but they definitely contribute to the offensive potential of the Russians in Kursk. A recent example of this is the attacks near Sverdlikova and Nikolaivka, where North Koreans contributed to taking Ukrainian positions, and the situation there has deteriorated. Anyone who shouts that North Koreans are just cannon fodder and contribute nothing really does not understand what is happening on the ground. I completely agree with this. So this is something you've heard me say a number of times. So here, not according to what many Ukrainian soldiers say, based on what Rob Lee posts on the matter, says someone in contradicting this. And but I agree with Null Reports here. If you dismiss the North Korean troops, you don't understand that people being thrown at Ukrainians right across particularly the Kursk fronts are people that can kill Ukrainians, that have weapons that need to be treated by the North Koreans. And that means that there are troops that don't need to be pulled from other areas of the front line to do what those North Koreans are doing. These North Koreans will still cause the deaths of Ukrainians, will still cause the attrition of Ukrainian equipment. I think it's absolutely foolish to dismiss the effect of the North Koreans. They are a problem. They may be cannon fodder. They may be used relatively ineffectively, but they still will have an effect. And that effect is going to be the death of Ukrainians and the attrition of Ukrainian equipment. Indeed, the Yonhap news agency, citing data from South Korea's Ministry of Defense, has reported that North Korea has now sent 200 long-range artillery units to Russia. So again, that's 200 bits of kit that is throwing lead at the Ukrainians. They will be killing Ukrainians. That's equipment that the Russians wouldn't have had. What would they have had to have done without that 200 pieces of equipment? What would have happened? What would there have been? An absence of artillery in Kursk, complete absence of artillery. Would they have had to have pulled artillery from elsewhere along the front line, causing gaps in the front line elsewhere? This North Korean equipment and the personnel that they are throwing at Russia are helping the Russians. There's no doubt about that. So 200 long-range artillery units are likely to send even more troops and weapons in support of Moscow's war against Ukraine. We've had a further commitment from Kim Jong-un that the North Koreans will be supporting Russia, essentially, I presume, for as long as it takes. It appears that North Korea is one of the best allies you could ask for. Right, Chris Owicki talks about equipment losses, and there have been several. There isn't one here. There's another. I thought he'd embedded it. I think he's embedded it on Twitter, but not on Blue Sky. On Twitter, he's embedded a video that is it's like 30 bits of equipment in a cross direction just destroyed by the side of the road. I've shown you heaps of videos of similar roads of death, if you like. And there's one in Procross where it's just littered with Russian equipment. So going back to kind of these stats and looking at Dell's stats, it all kind of adds up. We know the Russians are losing tremendous amounts of equipment. But there's another interesting idea as to why they might be using unarmored equipment as opposed to things like APCs and IFVs. I've been commenting recently that the use of these vehicles and fuel tanks, that you see that kind of category there, 169 lost yesterday, and this graph here represents a massive number of pieces of equipment in that category being taken out on a daily basis. Chris Owicki says, reacting to pictures of numerous destroyed Russian vehicles on the way to Pokrovsk, Russian war bloggers say that civilian vehicles are now used in preference to armor because commanders fear reprimands if armored vehicles are lost. Military Informant, which is a mill blogger, writes, the enemy publishes footage of destroyed Russian light vehicles in a Pokrovsk direction. As can be seen, civilian cars were converted into buggies and are used for rapid delivery of infantry similar to motorcycles earlier. A soldier writes to the neo-Nazi group Rusich to explain why. It's not just about the shortage of armoured vehicles. So there is a shortage of armoured vehicles. So that's the first point, that the Russians are suffering from a lack of combat assets, but it's also the personal consequences for commanders if they lose it. Men are expendable, but armour is not. Wow. Hello, quote, hello, we have a Ural Tornado armoured vehicle in our unit. About 6 months ago, they issued it. They use it to transport household goods, exclusively deep in the rear, but mostly it sits idle. And logistics are carried out to the firing position by a loaf, that's the Scooby-Doo van, the Bukanka, a UAZ 452 Bukanka, and a simple Kamaz truck without armour. That is, if the Tornado is burned during a combat mission, but the personnel are saved thanks to the armour characteristics of this vehicle. As a result, the unit commander will get his ass torn up for the loss of the vehicle, not for the loss of the people. It's incredible. So there are other reasons, not just that they are low on combat assets, but they also don't want to, I guess, use what precious combat assets they have because they get reprimanded for losing those valuable bits of kit. They'd rather lose not very valuable larders and bukankas, etc., etc. Brendan Kelly, and if you're watching, Brendan, please come on and let's have a chat about the work you've been doing, my good man. So Brendan Kelly has been working with Turchny and writing himself, says of some new data coming out combating the human safari. So this in Kherson and area, and it happens really all along the front line, but there's particular focus on this in Kherson because as a city, you're getting the daily murder of Ukrainian civilians that is turning the city into a ghost town, sadly. This week's stats from the Kherson governor, Alexander Prokudin, on anti-drone warfare: 1,540 FPV and skid drop attacks, 638 of which occurred in Kherson Hromada, 1,245 destroyed enemy drones, 532 which are brought down by mobile fire groups in Kherson Hromada. So it looks like they are trying to fight back against that, and I'll be interested to talk to Brendan about this to get a sense of what the locals are doing, or at least the armed forces in the area are doing, to try and safeguard those civilians, or what few must be left in Kherson. But yeah, good that he's sent this along to me to get a sense of some of the counter drone activity taking place there. Now, talking about drones, Russian theatre, says Nell reports, Russian troops shot down one of their own Elron 3 drones. Then they painted the Ukrainian flag on it to claim rewards instead of punishment. Then added a Balkenkreuz, a World War II German military symbol, for extra effect. What was their mistake? Leaving Russian language markings on the wing. I mean, first of all, we know it's a Russian drone. Then it's got Russian markings left on it. And then they just whack on a Ukrainian flag, hang it on a wall and say, look, can we have please some money for this, some reward for shooting down one of these drones? Oh, it's one of our own drones. And everyone knows it's one of our own drones. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But that is Russian theatre for you. Right, moving on to distant strikes. There were some serious missiles sent into Ukraine last night. I don't quite know the success of the missiles at the moment, so it's not on the infographic, but there was some success. In fact, I was looking at it kind of as it was happening last night, and there was, one missile was shot down for sure. Because at the time there were like 4 caliber missiles, and then there were 3 because one had been taken out. But anyway, Poltava seems to have been very much focused on last night, attacked by 19 missiles fired by Russia, which also launched 124 attack drones across Ukraine. Of the drones, 57 shot down, 64 were harmless, 3 reached their target. So 3 out of 124. That's a pretty good interception rate for the Ukrainians. Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Cherkasy regions also saw damage. There's no details yet on how many missiles were downed. Tim White then later says, actually, I just saw a comment from Ukraine's air forces about the missile attack, with all 19 missiles targeting gas production in Poltava, but details are not being made public. This is something that I've long said both sides should do, and it's sad when we actually see Russia do this. If you want to really take something out, you need to massively overwhelm it. Don't spread 19 missiles around Ukraine. Aim 19 missiles at targets in one place, and then really take those things out one by one. That's what I think should be happening, but for the Ukrainians should be doing that to Russian refineries and oil depots. Just absolutely hammer each of those ones, not with like 10, not with 20, but like all 60 drones that you send that night, send at that one place and take it out absolutely fundamentally. Well, it looks like that's what the Russians were trying last night, with targeting all 19 missiles at gas production in Poltava. Details are not being made public, which probably means there's some considerable damage. Some missiles were shot down, some were suppressed by electronic warfare, as a quote, but unfortunately there were hits, as you can well imagine. But I have to say, it's been a long time since we've seen missiles from the Russians. It really is. Let's have a look at missiles. Cruise missiles. Now, remember, these aren't cruise missiles that are fired. These are cruise missiles that are shot down. But there's a big old gap in the middle there, which allowed them to stockpile for these missiles. But as of late, I guess, good few weeks since the last one, certainly, I guess, they have of late had some pretty big numbers, but the consistency that we saw, if you go back down here between these large missile forays, there's actually very few missiles fired in between. It's not like here where there's quite consistent smaller numbers. Now, they wait and do bigger numbers, but again, 19 last night. It's not a massive amount. Anyway, I digress. So going back to the evidence of what has happened, here we have, I'm going to put my face back on. Hello. Here we have Anton Gerashenko saying, last night Russia launched yet another massive missile attack on Ukraine. In Poltava region, gas infrastructure was attacked. 9 settlements are without gas supply. In Kiev region, a daycare, 2 school buildings, a children's playground, and a private home were damaged. In Dnipropetrovsk region, 4 people were injured, 35 homes and 11 buildings were damaged. Russia continues attacking Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and bringing suffering to civilians. This is their readiness for negotiations. Ukrainians themselves last night did a pretty major attack, it appears, although details are not very... they're quite thin on the ground at the moment. Last night, as part of a campaign to enforce peace through force, the Saratov oil refinery, operated by Rosneft, with an annual processing capacity of around 7 million tons of oil, came under attack. Drone debris sparked a fire at the facility, is the quote, is the claim there. That's war translated. No report says, according to geolocated footage by Cyber Boroshino, the L-24's 6 hydro-cracking unit was likely hit. It's been in operation since 1970. No reports have previously said at night Ukrainian drones massively attacked Saratov oil refinery and the Engels airbase. Due to the threat, a carpet plan, so that's when they stop planes flying, was activated in Kherson, Kirov, Saratov and Ulyanovsk. Engels hosts bombers striking Ukraine, and the refinery processes 7 million tons of oil yearly. Both were reportedly hit. Interesting, so the airbase might have been hit as well. And what else? Just a few more bits of footage, searchlights and fire there. The air view attacked the Saratov oil refinery cracking, capacity of 7.2 million tons there. And yeah, quite a bright fire going off there. Now, what else do we hear about other strikes from previous days? Max24 says Rostec helicopter plant, Kubyshev, Lysychansk oil pipeline, oil depot, 3 oil refineries and LPDS station were attacked by drones in Russia over the past 2 days. That was what was claimed yesterday. So actually a number of other places being attacked, but we don't know any details. What else? Nothing too much to report there that's relevant for now. As you can see here, General Staff have just claimed responsibility, for what they say is a successful hit on the oil refinery in Saratov. Produces 20 types of petroleum products involved in supplying Russia's army as well. So that's Tim White adding to that. So sorry, that should have been a little bit earlier. And then we go on to other bits and pieces. I'm sure more details will emerge. Right, okay. Of the strikes last night, that is, for both sides. So, quote, Russia is working with Ukraine to open a humanitarian corridor for residents of the occupied parts of the Kursk region. There is hope for a positive outcome, says Tatiana Moskalkova, Russia's Commissioner for Human Rights. And doesn't she look like a Commissioner for Human Rights? She looks like she really cares about human rights there, dressed up in some kind of officious uniform. Right, Elon Musk has spread a false claim that the US controls 90% of Ukrainian media. The claim originated from a distorted interview and was amplified by pro-Kremlin sources. There you go. It is really annoying, but Elon Musk is a purveyor of fine Russian disinformation. As I told you last night, Tucker Carlson has splurged his disinformation online. Ukraine is reselling half of the American-supplied weapons to Mexican cartels operating along the US border. Up to 50% of American weapons sent to Ukraine are redirected and sold. This is not speculation, it's a fact, he said. Well, prove it, says no reports. As I said last night, it's such a ridiculous claim. It's prima facie obviously untrue. It's like 50%. What? Half the Patriot air defense systems, half the Bradley, half the Abrams tanks, half the F-16 pilot training. I'd like to see the Mexican cartels operating NASAMS air defense systems. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's obviously wrong. As also Source News says, a fact from where? Because Mexico is pretty open where cartels get their weapons from and even sued US gun manufacturers because of it. Please provide a specific concrete report indicating that Ukrainian weapons are being sent to cartels, ideally by a Mexican news source. Specifically also include cases where cartels have access to M1A1 Abrams, 155mm artillery shells, SHORAD, short-range air defense systems like Avengers, etc., etc. Of course, it's just absolute rollicks. There can be no doubt about Carlson's owners, as his lies are being spread across all Russian propaganda channels. So this is now something that the Russians are bigging up. They have just placed this in Tucker Carlson's ecosystem. Tucker Carlson regurgitates it, and then the Russians re-regurgitate it. as if this is coming from Tucker Carlson and not originally from themselves. Anyway, Tucker Carlson is an agent of Russia. What I'd like to see is someone, and I'd love to do this myself, if I was a lawyer, I would just take him to court. I'd love to see him taken to court. Say, right, I'm challenging you in court on this. You are lying. This is a lie. It's an outright lie, and I'm going to formally challenge you. I'd love to do that. I'd love to take him down to Chinatown. Yeah, take him down to Chinatown. Right. President Zelensky has announced that more schools will open in shelters in frontline regions. Thanks to existing ones in Kharkiv, Sumy and Zaporizhia, thousands of children can learn offline, connect with classmates and stay united. So that's really good that they're putting a lot of effort into continuing education for children. Otherwise, they're going to have entire cohorts of children whose education will be ruined, but also, there'll be massive psychological impact on children. They need this kind of consistency, routine in their lives. They need dependability, especially when their families might well have been affected by the war. Right, unfortunately, the BBC's aired a documentary by Sean Langan, by the looks of it, favouring the Kremlin's view. Langan illegally entered occupied Ukraine and joined Russian military activities. It's a real shame that BBC had done this. This is what Jonathan Fink was talking about yesterday in our live stream. British filmmaker Sean Langan illegally crossed into occupied Ukrainian territory via Russia to make Ukraine's war the other side. This is a documentary that appears to echo Russian justifications for the war. Here we debunk the propaganda myths it contains, says United 24, and they go on a debunking thread here. But it's just such a shame they have to do this, and I think that's irresponsible of the BBC. Okay, this is what Mikola says, though. So maybe there's another side to this. I haven't watched it yet, so I've just watched the film. The question that BBC journalists most often asked Russians was, are you offended that you are not understood in the West? I was left with the impression that this is a main message of the film about poor, misunderstood Russian occupiers. Talk to a lot of nice people. Nice people don't invade their neighbours with guns in their hands. They don't kill and rob. They don't use hypocritical ideology to justify their atrocities. Disgusting. Yeah, in other words, okay. There is no justification for this. So, that is a real shame. So I think some pressure needs to be put on the BBC for that. That's for sure. Kiev Insider reporting here that deepening losses in Russia's coal industry have prompted governor of Russia's largest coal producing region to warn that, quote, survival of the whole industry is now at stake. This is why the US, the EU, UK need to keep their foot on Russia's economic neck here to really pressure Russia. I think they're on a precipice, but we're at a moment where the US is I think, starting to take their foot off Russia, and we'll talk about this in a second. I just want to give some props here to Chris Hayes. So Chris Hayes is an MSNBC presenter. I really like Chris Hayes, by the way. He's very thoughtful, very knowledgeable, and he's written a book called Siren's Call, which here John Favreau says is an absolutely magnificent book. It's a must read. It's about it's relevant for all of us, where attention is our most valuable currency. So if you think about time, there's a great film with Justin Timberlake called In Time, where basically your currency is time, and if you pay for time, and if your time runs out, you die, and it's in your arm. It was a really interesting concept for a film, and I really think it's absolutely right, which is, you can have all the money in the world, but really what we want most of is time, in order to be able to use money or our kindness, our love for our family and friends, and our time that we spend doing this, doing that. So time is our most valuable resource, I guess. And in light of that, attention is a really valuable resource. And when you are talking about social media and mainstream media and any kind of media, it's all about, you can talk about computer games and Netflix. It's all about getting our attention and keeping our attention for as long as possible. So the Siren's Call is about how our attention is being fought over, so on and so forth. It explains how humans mistake online engagement for social connection, why the media is beholden to flashy headlines, and why no one can bear being alone with their thoughts. So really interesting sounding book. I really do want to read it, actually. But he originally had a 5,000 word prologue to the book about Zelensky in the war in Ukraine, and it's this part of the discussion I found really fascinating. I'm just going to play it here for you.
Why do you think that worked?
It's so funny. The original draft of this book had a 5,000 word prologue that was about the Ukraine war and Zelensky, and I cut it because it sort of felt like a weird place to start. But I think he's a fascinating figure because here's a guy whose professional life is how to get and maintain attention because he was a comedian.
Yes.
Then he wrote and starred in a show that is a attention age parable in which a substitute teacher in a high school goes on a rant about corruption in Ukraine while a student surreptitiously records him on a video. It gets uploaded and goes viral.
I forgot that was
thus
the show.
Launching the teacher into an unlikely campaign for president, which he wins. That show is the biggest show in Ukraine by far. It's watched by like a third to a half of the country. He then trademarks the name of the party in the show as his own party and runs for president, having written a show about a viral dude running for president successfully, and destroys the competition, then finds himself immediately after a few sort of stumbling years as a wartime president, like literally ducking Russian bombs, and understands immediately that the single most important thing for the survival of his nation is to grab the attention of the world so as to convert that attention into arms and money to support their defense.
And I've been thinking about him since I read that in your book. And I do there's sort of a moral clarity in his rhetoric. Like, I was trying to think of how he spoke and why he got so much attention. Part of it is just the circumstances he found himself in. But he was very good about, he wasn't trying to embellish things. He wasn't trying to do, push all the buttons you push when you're trying to go for the lizard brain stuff.
Yes.
It was just moral clarity. Putin is a murderous tyrant, and here are my people, and here are their stories, and I'm going to walk among them. Like, it was just, the story was good.
The story was good, but also the appetite to talk to people and communicate constantly.
That's true.
This is a big
part of it.
He
was everywhere. He still is everywhere.
He did Letterman in a metro station. I just saw him do an interview with Lex Friedman, the podcaster, and Friedman speaks fluent Russian, and they have this fascinating fraud exchange at the beginning where Friedman's speaking to him in Russian, and of course, Zelensky is from the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine and actually grew up speaking Russian as his household language, but was explaining to Friedman why he won't use Russian now because of what it means at a moment when people speaking that mother tongue are killing his people. And it was this incredibly intense exchange. And this is something that I think there really is Zelensky talks to everyone. He does a lot of trying to get attention. Lopez Obrador in Mexico, who was the only incumbent basically to buck the trend of incumbents around the world getting their butts kicked, and passed off the presidency to his hand-chosen successor, Claudia Sheinbaum, who won by 30 points, was doing 3 hours a day.
Yeah.
He gave away a watch on his last press conference to some kid. Narendra Modi, who's got 65% approval rating and is a reactionary and I think sort of aspiring autocrat, but he's doing all sorts of crazy stunts where he's on TV all the time.
Trump this time around
has been
too.
on TV all day, every day. And I just I'm that part of it, I don't think has an ideological valence. I really don't.
No.
Yes, there's something a little there is something a little Caudillo-esque about I'm going to do 3-hour press conferences every day.
Yeah.
But you could do that as a liberal. You could just
the importance of attention, isn't it? The importance of being in the limelight. Trump knows this. He does it really well. Zelensky knows that, and he's done it exceptionally successfully. And the other thing I want to just touch on from this discussion that I found fascinating was how Chris Hayes says a physical subscription to a newspaper is really important, as in the paper copy of a newspaper, because you end up reading things that you otherwise wouldn't in a clickbaity kind of world. And there's really important really important journalism that's taking place that you would otherwise overlook, including, and he exemplifies the point concerning Ukraine.
I do think a physical subscription to the newspaper is a great idea.
Yeah.
It really is. And I got a thing about papers piling up, and it makes me feel neurotic and claustrophobic.
Same, yeah.
But
it is good. The editorial attention direction, I think, is something that we're missing.
I have read more articles about the war. The New York Times has been covering the war in Ukraine with tremendous amount of resources and sustained focus, and those stories never take off online.
Yeah.
No one shares them, talks about them, and I've been reading their coverage, and it's really good coverage. I feel like I have actually a way better understanding.
But I remember thinking about this when the war first started. I was like, Putin, he just wants to wait everyone out because he knows
absolutely
that at the age of attention, it's going to go away.
It's like a log in a fire, man. It burns up fast, and then you got to come up with ways to throw more logs on there.
Yeah. It's a fantastic book.
So, a really interesting point there about, Putin recognizing the attention, playing the long game. We talked about this before. Putin playing the long game, hoping that the world's attention would subside. But it's really interesting that, there are some of these mainstream media, and, New York Times articles aren't always on point with Ukraine. There are some times where we've talked about how that article does not do justice for what's going on, blah, 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 blah. But that's, concentrating on the miss and forgetting the hits, where actually they're consistently producing very good reportage on Ukraine over a very long period of time. And actually, Chris Hayes here is saying they should be given props for that. Okay, just some last bits on peace plans. The Kremlin has no information on Steve Witkoff. Who's Steve Witkoff? So his arrival in Moscow, who is referred to as an unofficial advisor to Trump. No contacts are planned, according to Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman. Well, okay, so that's what is officially saying. There's clearly some discussions going on in Moscow. Steve Witkoff's jet has unexpectedly landed in Moscow. He is also an unofficial envoy in the Middle East. The Gulfstream G650ER arrived from Washington, but the purpose of the visit remains undisclosed. Witkoff is a close aide to Trump, so he's in Moscow at the moment. And then we literally see the US ambassador to Moscow, Lynn Tracy, visiting the Russian Foreign Ministry. Per Russian media, her visit coincides with Steve Witkoff's alleged visit to Moscow. Delivering a message? Who knows? So there's something going on with regard to peace plans. It's also worth noting that Keith Kellogg has just said we are putting the peace plan on hold at the moment because we need to take into account European voices. About bloody time. It's like the US has previously just been saying, right, we're going to unilaterally decide the future of Ukraine, even without Ukraine. It's like, here's an example. So there are mixed messages going on. So, the US deciding Ukraine's fate with Russia bilaterally, but without recourse to what either Ukraine wants, but also Europe. It's like, on the one hand, you're saying Europe needs to spend more, this is your war, you need to spend more money and put more equipment into supporting Ukraine. But by the way, we're going to decide what happens to Ukraine, and you're not, and neither is Ukraine. So there's some really problematic scenarios going on here. However, they have formally, like Keith Kellogg has said, actually, we are going to put the peace plan on hold because we do need European voices involved. Yeah, you think? Right, so Trump has claimed that Ukraine essentially agreed to give US access to its rare earth minerals. He insisted that the US access to Ukraine's resources must be guaranteed, regardless of possible peace talks with Russia, citing America's alleged $300 billion contribution. So he's now upped America's contribution from the false $200 billion. It's 177, 200, now 300 billion, and we need money back for that. It's absolutely insane. Here, Trump, according to Nexter, said Ukraine someday could become part of Russia. No, this is not a joke. In an interview with Fox News, US President Donald Trump suggested that Ukraine might one day end up as part of Russia. Because of this, he argued Kyiv must guarantee the security of American investments and repay the money spent on it as soon as possible. So now that the US has helped Ukraine and has given, presidential drawdown authority, USAID, and other forms of, foreign investment into Ukraine. Thank you very much, Joe Biden and the administration. Now Trump's come in and say, oh, now we need payment back for that. We want to be paid back for all of that. And we're going to take that payment back in terms of your rare earth metals and minerals. Because of this, he argued Kiev must guarantee the security of American investments and repay the money spent on it as soon as possible. Quote, they could become Russia someday or maybe not. Trump demanded $500 billion worth of rare earth metals from Ukraine and claimed that Kiev has essentially agreed to the deal. Notably, he previously mentioned a $500 million agreement, but now the figure has increased 1,000-fold. Just what is going on?
And, they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have all this money in there, and I say I want it back. And I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to. And
he wants $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed it. So Tim White has pretty much my opinion here. Having set about stealing Gaza, Trumpington now outlines he's going to plunder Ukraine. Being an ally of the USA is very risky these days. Enemies, Russia, China, North Korea, literally get better treatment. But this statement is all bluster. He thinks that's bluster. I don't know. I think that's what they're doing. And not only that, but according to Reuters, US plans to urge European allies to purchase more US arms for Ukraine. There are a lot of options out there, Keith Kellogg told Reuters, also confirming that previously Biden-approved shipments continue flowing into Ukraine. So there is still aid going to Ukraine, but further aid. And my last thing to say about this is the US is not only looking to, I think, plunder Ukrainian natural resources, but is also looking to be Slovakia, which is to say we're not going to give further aid, government aid to Ukraine, even though there's all that presidential drawdown authority left from the Biden era, but we're not going to give you further aid, but you can buy it off us. That's exactly what I've been saying about Robert Fitzo and how that there's a complete double standard here, which is it's not good enough. We're not going to do that. It's morally not appropriate that we give you aid, but you can buy it off us. Okay, so in other words, morality goes out the window when you can just flash some cash. So I think there's some problems with peace plans at the moment. It's going to be interesting to see how this all develops. Let me know what your thoughts are about this and whether you align with what I'm saying or whether you want to contest what I'm saying. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care and I'll speak to you soon.